Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son, Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Hi, Dad. Good morning. Thanks for having me on again. You know, so many things happening right now in the world and in our watch on every level. And so I want to, I want to talk about some of the, what I see in the news this week is the things we've been questioning about the string pullers. You know, what's really going on? How can we start assimilating all this news into some confident picture of, why or what's behind this? What could be? Can we reduce the number of options as to what are we looking at here? Because the Pope, even I've been reading some stuff this week. Even the Pope's going to come up in our news as he has been constantly. It finally got my attention. Not that it isn't always important to us, but they really got the Pope out in the world, don't they? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, on my newsreel, every day almost, every week lately. It's like we talked about just before Christmas came around and the holidays, how all of a sudden all the news about Syria, about North Korea, about Russia, arms buildup, terrorism, migrant crisis, all these things just faded suddenly for about 4 to 6 weeks there, if you remember. I kept saying, what happened to my news? It's all pop culture. For about 4 to 6 weeks there around Christmas, everything in my news inbox from Yahoo turned to pop culture. And then now, of course, it's come back since then, and it's every week. And I say that there's certain stories that I notice are there every day. They show the same cover story, same headline. It's not a follow-up story. It's the same story. One of them this week says, Israel demands world powers punish Iran for missile tests. This has been more than once now on this small list of, half a dozen weekly headlines, daily headlines, that it's coming up during the week more than once. 2 days in a row, sometimes 3 days in a row. And so the Pope, he's in here a lot. And so I happened to come across a movie that I suppose it was made off that, but I never read the book Left Behind. Remember when someone wrote that book, Left Behind, about the people who were going to get left from the rapture? The rapture's going to happen and the rest of the world's going to be like, huh? Well, Nicolas Cage made a movie, I guess, a couple of years ago. He's the lead. There's no one else really in it. And it has all this feel of a B movie. It's interesting that in that subject matter, even Nicolas Cage, they're not about to make an A movie with A producers and such. So it's got all this feel like a B movie. But Nicolas Cage is in the lead role to anchor it in the, I guess, in the public view as something worthy of attention. Or you can imagine the attention it got because I guess it's the only reason I watched it. Nicolas Cage was in it. I thought, whoa, Left Behind. But is that Left Behind like the Christian story of the rapture? And yes, it is. I imagine a lot of Christians are familiar with this movie, but I'm out of the loop for the most part, and I never heard of it, and I just came across it, and anyway, I watched it. And it's really going to figure into our rapture discussion soon, because it paints that traditional picture of millions of people vanishing off the earth. And what I found mind-blowing, Dad, was that they'd even portray it in a, how would you say, in a favorable light, right? Nicolas Cage's character comes to realize it's all true, and he's missed the rapture. Of course, there's zero scriptural understanding in any of it. It's pure tradition. In fact, the quote at the end of the movie says, "Of that day and that hour knoweth no man," right? So Matthew 24. But I think, wow, that's kind of timely, to be putting out a movie, putting Nicolas Cage's name with it, painting it in the strictly tradition, like there was not it looks to me like there's not a soul researched it to see if this traditional story of millions of people just vanishing on some day in which no one knows, and the drama that's going to create is what it centered around, just this world-changing event, which, of course, if it happens in that traditional manner, millions of people all over the world. So I won't get into the rapture discussion today because this isn't the show for it, but I want to tie it into, the contemporary nature of the story. 2014, this movie was made with Nicolas Cage to tell the traditional rapture story from from an apologist point of view. And so, anyway, it's worth checking that out before, I encourage people to watch that movie, because that to me is the traditional view that with absolutely zero scriptural underpinning. There's zero reference to the Messiah returning, the Jews rebuilding the temple, the false deliverer, there's zero reference to anything around the end times, just a time of trouble, right? It's just and somehow, of course, it's all happening to the Americans. It happens all over the world in the movie, but of course we're focused on these Christians that get raptured. So anyhow, the fact that it is pertinent, and what I also watched this week, that's why I'm bringing up my movie reviews, Dad, is I watched Spotlight, the picture that won the Academy Award about the discovery, let's call it, journalistic discovery of the rampant pedophilia in the Catholic Church, almost to the point of being, institutionalized pedophilia. And that's come out over the years. And when I watched the movie, Dad, I thought, wow, somebody threw the Catholic Church under the bus, didn't they? And this has been going on forever. Don't tell me that whoever was running that Spotlight Boston Globe wasn't getting their strings pulled from up above. They pulled them off that story to go to the 9/11 story, right? And then after that, they put them back on it. So, there's no shortage in America or anywhere in the world of good journalism being buried for bad timing or bad, subject matter. And so these things come out, I think, in order to create either distractions, points of contention and conflict, all sorts of reasons. And that's why I'm bringing it up here, is because I'm looking at one of these lead articles for Sunday, Pope Francis to visit Auschwitz camp. So that's not really in the news I want to talk about, but I did want to mention that it seemed to me that what happened with this whole spotlight thing was the beginning of, remember, this view from the Albert Pike standpoint of fomenting these world wars, and the last one's supposed to bring the religious people against the non-religious people. And this whole agents of the Illuminati, and I've been looking at and learning a little bit about, I went through some of the history of the leaders, the modern leaders, and where they come from out of the past. And it's really, it's such a small story if you stand back far enough to look at it, and you don't get caught up in what's on the news every day, tearing our world into little sound bites of misinformation and disinformation and half information to keep us on a sort of, in a carnival, in a masquerade ball, where everything is not what it seems. And if you can stand back far enough, that all just sort of finds its chaotic place in a bigger picture. And so, I'm looking at this whole picture that goes back from, the Roman Empire, because that's what Daniel, to layer in our eschatological view, that fourth kingdom on the earth, the horns that grow out of it, the fight with the Seleucids that come down through history that become that territory, and how that's still the center of attention. And in a way it always has been, but the rest of the board has been, expanded, the rest of the resources of the whole board. But meanwhile, the focus is, it's never really been off that land. And if you want to tie that into the religious point of view of God scattering his people 2,000 years ago, and them become known as not his people, it's just not about them anymore. And then this deadly head, as we've been talking about in Revelation, Dad, his head wounded to death, and the whole world wonders after this state of Israel. Oh my gosh, they're back. And so it's these deeper ties that I think are the foundation of what I'm, my own watch, and reading the news, to read between the lines, and to see this eschatological view becoming this materialistic view through history of, all the way from Egypt, essentially coming out of Egypt into the promised land, and then into captivity for not keeping the temple, not living up to what he asked them to. This whole big story involves these central players, and then the players that come into it historically adjacent to that. And as we come into our modern time, as I'm always pointing out, it seems very much, Dad, that this all starts right about 100 years ago, a little more now, maybe 120 years ago. And that's just about when you got this alleged Albert Pike letter in this Third World War, First, Second, and Third World War, but the one that we haven't reached yet, because the first and second seem to do exactly what Albert Pike laid out, which means it was that's either phony, that was attributed back to him to cover somebody else's butt, perhaps, or fictionalize it, or whatever. I can believe all that. But the Third World War, the conditions weren't in that place in the late 50s yet. I mean, we were just in Iran with our meddling. The Kingdom of Saud and all that. I suppose perhaps this naval officer, William Guy Carr, had some insight on the history the way he was watching it, since the turn of the century, because remember, he's the one that's purporting or reporting that this prediction of world wars comes from this cardinal who saw it in the British Museum, written by Albert Pike to Mazzini. And so, that's what he's claiming, and he's relating it, obviously, in his life in the 50s to the First and Second World Wars, which have passed. Name of the book is Pawns in the Game. I've never read it, Dad. I've only seen it come across my radar as I've studied these issues. But it certainly does throw out, along with then Professor Quigley in the 60s, his view of it, and this banking cartel that has enough power since the 17th century and the establishment of fractional reserve banking, and that they've infiltrated all the nations of the earth and all the systems, and that they have a plan to rule the earth and all its resources completely, utterly, to have complete rule, to not have anybody that can go against them. So I say that all of these things are what are really going on, and if you have those as a context, then the news becomes something alive, rather than, when I watch anyone watching the news or taking it at face value, telling me what the New York Times or the Washington Post reported, I just think, wow, you're watching a game show. You're believing that what you're seeing in the cartoon is real? You mean like planes flying into buildings that Arabs hijacked from us? You mean that cartoon? So I have to keep repeating that, Dad, because there's new people, and if you don't know, it didn't happen that way. So keep your mind open, keep searching, and stop believing what's on television and in these, read between the lines. That's what I'm trying to do. And so the first article, Dad, funny enough, you never see me talking about politics, especially American politics, talking about a game show. But this week I got two articles out of American politics. The first one is from March 11th out of Esquire by Charles P. Pierce. Bernie Sanders said something we weren't ready to hear last night. And I just want to quote Bernie here. He's being asked about supporting the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua and having once paid some compliments to the Castro regime in Cuba, right? He was a left-winger. And so he's answering for that. And I just want to use this, Dad, to support a lot of the conspiracy theory sort of underpinnings that I'm always asking people to, observe in our history, meaning the United States of America. And so here it is from Bernie Sanders, current Democratic presidential, nominee or at least candidate to be nominee. So this is a quote from Bernie. Well, let me just answer that. This is an answer to why he supported the Sandinistas and had paid some compliments to the Castro regime in Cuba. What that was about was saying that the United States was wrong to try to invade Cuba, that the United States was wrong trying to support people to overthrow the Nicaraguan government, that the United States was wrong trying to overthrow in 1954 the government democratically elected of Guatemala. Throughout the history of our relationship with Latin America, we've operated under the so-called Monroe Doctrine, and that said the United States had the right to do anything they wanted to do in Latin America. So I actually went to Nicaragua and I very shortly opposed the Reagan administration's efforts to overthrow that government. And I strongly opposed earlier Henry Kissinger to overthrow the government of Salvador Allende in Chile. I think the United States should be working with governments around the world, not get involved in regime change. And all of these actions, by the way, in Latin America brought forth a lot of very strong anti-American sentiments. That's what that was about. All right, so here's Bernie Sanders laying it on the line from the 50s, and what we've done, I've referred to it many times, Dad, because I've come across all this information many times. We don't teach it to our kids in school. We don't talk about it much in our journalism in the United States of America. But this is what America has been doing before it even got to the Middle East, because in those days, the resources of Central and South America were seen as, remember, America was pumping its own oil. Those companies were getting rich out of Texas, pumping their own oil. And the Middle East oil was something that, they didn't have much of it to sell to anybody yet. We were already over there making our deals. I think it was in the 40s that we first went over there, Roosevelt, to make a deal instead of England with must have been the Kingdom of Saud or whoever was important over there, to go sit down and say, hey, you're going to want to do business with us in the future, not England. But, we already had the same sort of control that started after World War I going on in the Middle East, which I suppose was just to keep those people divided and unable to take back from France and England the territory of Iraq and Syria, Lebanon, Palestine that was being divided up and given to Europeans now called Jews and whatever other interests. I don't know the history of that area, but you can see what it's caused. Look what Bernie Sanders is pointing at to Central America here from the early 50s. And so it's because they were, that was the moment when they had their democratic movements, when their people were banding together as people to elect their governments to say, yeah, let's, say no to those multinationals. Let's keep it in our own. Let's make ourselves strong, right? Couldn't have that in the world. That's how great America is, Christians, that might be listening out there. Great and free, really. We're the biggest terrorists that ever lived, and the scripture verifies that. America, this land terrible from its beginnings. So here's some of its, not even its beginnings, it's just the, matter of course. Matter of course. So that's what's, imagine that. That's what's going on. Matter of course. Regime change. Having our way with Ukraine. Even though it's not, what's Russia gonna do? And then they've been set up to have the weapons so they can do something about it. Who's allowed the world to get into this sort of circumstance? And why would you do that when you look at the control that's been exercised over all these different regions for, a couple of generations? So anyway, that's Bernie Sanders telling it like it is in Central America. So now I think the biggest article this week, Dad, that we have to go through a little bit is, this coming uprooting, the way I'm seeing it. This is out of the AP by Zaina Karam from Saturday. It looks like 5 years after the spark, Syria war at a critical juncture. After 5 years of bloodshed, after 250,000 deaths. It's funny, too, Dad, I forgot to mention last week in one of those articles. Again, 250,000, more than 250,000. Haven't they been saying that for about 6 months now? And didn't we read a few weeks ago another report that said some 430,000? I remember I brought attention to the fact that, wow, that seemed a dramatic jump, and where'd they get those numbers? And then now we're back to 250. You just 250,000, we're just leaving it at that. It's like they told us in one of these other articles some 5,000 a month were dying in Syria. I don't know if I read that in the last couple of weeks, but I recall reading that was the numbers, some 5,000 people a month. I thought, wow, that's 60,000 people a year. So if if it was 250,000 people 6 months ago, it's at least 280,000. I mean, I don't know. It just seems 5 years of bloodshed after 250,000 deaths and the flight of millions of refugees, Syria has arrived at a critical juncture. A diplomatic framework is in place to end the carnage. A 2-week-old partial ceasefire is holding, and peace talks are set to resume in coming days. Now, I'm sorry, Dad, but all the news that I've read shows that, in fact, we read last week the one leader of the 97 factions, the top rebel leader, isn't going to Geneva. They're not ready to talk about anything yet. So what diplomatic framework is in place are they talking about that we don't know about? To end the carnage, a 2-week-old partial ceasefire, which you read in every other article, has not been holding since the day that they started it. So it's a 2-week-old misfire, and it's one of the reasons that nobody's getting together to talk at the peace talks. So right off the bat, when I read this article, I thought, well, wait a minute, what are you guys talking about here? A diplomatic framework is in place to end the carnage? Which one? You mean the one that hasn't been working the last couple of weeks that everyone's denouncing, that no one will go to the peace talks to talk about because it doesn't make any sense while everybody's shooting at each other and nobody can decide? Saudi Arabia is saying it can't happen at all with Assad. He's got to go, and now they're using the words dead or alive. So that's only become exacerbated. So who's sitting down to talk peace? What diplomatic framework are we talking about that's in place? Saudi Arabia's got 350,000 people chomping at the bit to go kill Assad. That side's talking about dead or alive. He's got to go. The diplomatic side, who are they talking to? Who are they going to talk to if Assad gets killed? Who do you talk to on the other side? Do we already know? I haven't read anything about that. So a diplomatic framework is in place to end the carnage. Don't believe that for a minute. Quote, the indicators from a distance are all good, said Bassam Barabandi, a Washington-based former Syrian diplomat who now serves as a political advisor to the Syrian opposition. But it's an extremely fragile moment, and the way is still long, he added. The indicators from a distance all look good, Dad. That's his quote. And again, I just went over them, so I won't go over them again. Which indicators? The fact that no one's stuck with the ceasefire, that nobody can agree on whether Assad can be part of the negotiation or not. Anyway, yeah. It sounds, it gets worse, I think. Few think fighting will end altogether. I guess, so this is part of the good indicators. This is the very next sentence, by the way. Few think fighting will end altogether, and the efforts could collapse again at any point. So let's read that again. The indicators from a distance are all good, said Bassam Barabandi, a Washington-based former Syrian diplomat. Son of a gun. Few think fighting will end altogether, and the efforts could collapse again at any point. Bitter divisions over the future of President Bashar Assad threaten to scuttle any serious negotiations for a political transition in the immediate future. Let's start that again. A diplomatic framework is in place to end the carnage. A 2-week-old partial ceasefire is holding, and peace talks are set to resume in coming days. Well, that all sounds nice. The indicators from a distance are all good. Next paragraph, few think fighting will end altogether, and the efforts could collapse again at any point. Bitter divisions over the future of President Bashar Assad threaten to scuttle any serious negotiations for a political transition in the immediate future. Talk is on the rise that a partition is the best case scenario. So I think this is, where we're going with this, Dad. A partition, right? I wonder if it'll be along the Euphrates River there, where the Greater Israel Product puts it. Still, there are numerous indications that the war has reached a point when guns may start giving way to politics. Quote, we are finishing phase 1 and moving on to phase 2, Barabandi said. Phase 1 and 2 of what? It doesn't say here. What are they working on that prospects look good? See, that's what I've been saying, Dad. It probably does look good. Heck, the mercenary army ISIS is, with all this modern weaponry, is pushing those borders back. We may have a political solution before anyone knows it. Yeah, they're still killing people left and right. 250,000 people. We don't even bother to adjust the number because they don't even count those people. Can you imagine if we were talking that way about Americans? Right? We count them up every day. Iraq war, right? We're counting them up every day. How many died today, this week, this month? Over there, it's just 250,000. They're just not even, that's got to be why. It doesn't really matter. They're not really people. We are finishing phase 1 and moving on to phase 2. At the heart of the current diplomacy, an internationally shared desire to put an end to a war that has unleashed Islamic extremists across the globe, destabilized neighboring countries, and inundated Europe with refugees. So here you go, guys. What have I been saying for months, Dad? At the heart of the current diplomacy is what? This false flag, mercenary army created something going on a deeper level called an internationally shared desire to put an end to a war that has unleashed Islamic extremists across the globe. Okay, so that's one thing it's been able to do. Destabilized neighboring countries. We saw that coming with the Arab Spring, didn't we, Dad? And inundated Europe with refugees, which I just talked about last week, I think has got more to do with now with pressuring Europe from Turkey's standpoint and the move that's coming from that front, as much as it may have to do with the false flags that can divide the people of Europe and provoke them to war when the time comes. Quote, international opinion is drifting away from the opposition and the idea of political change in Syria, unquote, said Aaron Lund, non-resident associate of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Watch out. Carnegie Endowment, number 1, if you know where that comes from, for international peace. Sounds like the people who loan money to build weapons. An editor of Syria in Crisis, quote, much of the world just wants stability, an end to terror sanctuaries, a stemming of refugee flows. They don't want to see Syria on the front page of their morning newspapers anymore. Oh, you poor white-collar criminals. Sorry. So look at how the two last paragraphs intertwine, right? An internationally shared desire to put an end to a war that has unleashed Islamic extremism across the globe. So what does this non-resident associate of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and editor of Syrian Crisis say? Much of the world just wants stability, an end to terror sanctuaries, destabilize neighboring countries, was what they just called it in the paragraph before. A stemming of refugee flows and inundated Europe with refugees, right? He's just repeated what they stated in the last paragraph to make sure we get it in our head that this is what this war has done, right? Much of the world it's unleashed this instability. Again, forgive me if that doesn't ring with what the Third World War is predicted to do, so unnerve the entire world, right? Unhinge them, unnerve them, undo them, is what it says. I don't know. Is that what's going on here? First time in my life, the whole, everybody's, North Korea, can't stop threatening. And they're in our news again this week, Dad, because I see it as more of this symptom of the world being unhinged right now in the way of this prediction of the Third World War coming about. Because it just doesn't make sense to me at this moment when economies are hurting and tempers are flaring. Why isn't there we don't allow it, for instance, in our own communities. We crack down pretty hard. It's at that moment when you've got riots and stuff going on that the National Guard comes out. You don't sit at home and wait till things turn into civil war and then wait till the Civil War becomes really entrenched, which is what we've done over there. We first got the hostilities going and then funded and fueled both sides and then stayed out of the way and pretended, oh, darn, what do we do? Oh, darn, ISIS. Oh, darn. When you saw the potential for unleashing Islamic extremists across the globe, destabilizing neighboring countries, and inundating Europe with refugees, you got to figure there's some intelligence on the ground since you've been in these countries for 100 years. And you've been pulling regime change since the 50s. And you're just going to tell me that all this is on accident. They just don't want to see Syria on the front page of their morning newspapers anymore. Ugh, it just makes me want to throw up. 5 years have passed since the uprising began, first with a small protest in downtown Damascus on March 2011, followed a few days later by larger protests in the southern city of Daraa in response to the arrests and torture of high school students who scrawled anti-government graffiti on a school wall. Coming after a string of so-called Arab Spring uprisings that toppled dictators in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya. The protests triggered panic in the echelons of the Syrian power structure. So what do you think, Dad? We called the Arab Spring. How long has it been since a few high school students scrawling anti-government graffiti results in toppled dictators? When's that? Did that ever happen in Saudi Arabia, or are they still chopping people's hands and heads off over there, right? They kill more people than the Bushes in Texas, right? So I'm just wondering, where's the history of popular uprisings like the so-called Arab Spring, toppling dictators? Because as I remember, it was NATO weaponry that toppled these dictators, not kids with cell phones. And as I wrote and was talking about at that time, doesn't make sense to me that the people, the affluent kids, the ones that lived, the kids of all these corrupt senators and clerics and such that had cell phones and flashy cars and got to live the life the best, they were the ones that were, they were the ones going against this tyrannical regime of dictators. So none of that made sense from the beginning, right? How did they expect to get anywhere? What kind of battle-hardened rebels were these that were going to overtake dictators? Because these were the softest people that ever lived, just like in our country. Real easy for people like me to be an activist on a computer or a cell phone, right? I've never been sprayed with pepper spray. I've never been hauled off to jail. And, the thing that activists have to do to stand in the way of injustice. It's easy to stand out here in cyberland. That's why they let us do it. But anyhow, so that's never made any sense to me. And what it resulted in, as I say, is these dictators that primarily Egypt, where was he getting his money? Tunisia, Libya? I mean, you can see pictures of as recent as the 90s, not within 10 years, if not less, of Hillary Clinton standing with Muammar Gaddafi and his kid and shaking their hands. And, as you were reporting, Dad, after Libya got the message after 2000, when he sided with Syria and Iraq to say, no, we're not going for this new deal you guys are cutting with Israel. All of a sudden, he got the word and he changed his tune and said, I love the Jews. They can come and live in Libya, no problem. We're all for it. So I'm hard-pressed to find the atrocities that were going on in Libya that demanded such a change of heart from our state position, right, to one of supporting a NATO invasion and uprooting. And of course, look what's come of that. And to think we have zero intelligence. We didn't know Egypt was going to turn into a place of zero control and factions of extremists vying for power and a breeding ground for terrorists and all. Yeah, we didn't know that. We weren't planning on that. We weren't planning on putting Egypt and Libya and all these places in that position when we supported these uprisings. So that's the way it's got to be read as far as I'm concerned. So now imagine what's Syria to do. Not that I believe what they say, that Assad's reaction was so that he was torturing high school students. We already know the international community found it wasn't him that was shooting the chemical weapons. It was the rebels supported by us, the West, that was shooting using chemical weapons, not the government. And why would he? Why would he bring the international? He's the sovereign leader. He's the elected leader. If you want to question the elections, bring that up in international court. Show your evidence. But otherwise, until you do, he's in the position of being the leader of the country and having everything, all the institutions under his power. So this protest, small protest in downtown Damascus, that to me reeks of Arab Spring protests in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya. Who was behind that? I don't think it was kids with cell phones, right? I think it was mercenary armies working for these same buggers that are been destabilizing that region as part of a strategy. And so obviously the intelligence on the ground for the Syrian regime was quite aware of that. And whatever they did to disrupt that, I believe, is what we'd be calling torturing students and a popular uprising from our end of the propaganda. And so, of course, he's been put in the position where there's nothing he can do but defend himself because they're coming for him like they came for Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya. And Iraq. And so anyway, and they're fomenting this crisis, which is part of what I want to get into now, is the really deeper picture, as I learned from Sheikh Hossein about this Sunni-Shia civil war. I never saw that as the deeper play, but when you refer back to this Third World War prediction that they're going to use agents of the Illuminati to foment this war between Islam and the Jews, Judea. This is this grander picture going on the way I'm seeing it now. And so let me just finish this. This article's really, I thought, had the most information about, revealing where we're at. So 5 years have passed since a small protest in downtown Damascus. Then after a string of so-called Arab Spring uprisings, the protesters triggered panic in the echelons of Syrian power structure. Naturally, they saw the writing on the wall. They're coming for you. Security forces responded with brute force. Within a few months, the confrontations morphed into an armed insurgency, and the conflict slid into one of the most savage civil wars in recent history. Again, the journalism there is mind-blowing, right? The confrontations morphed. Right here is where you would want to describe that adjective or adverb, but with some adjectives. Morphed how? Morphed from what? From a bunch of people that been living oppressed, is what you're going to want me to believe. This dictator, did he let his opposition run through the streets armed with equal weaponry? Did he let them? So. How did they morph? How do these people that are so oppressed by dictators that have been around for decades suddenly morph into an armed insurgency under the very same circumstances they were under yesterday when they weren't able to morph? How did they do that? And the conflict slid into one of the most savage civil wars in recent history. Well, if you think it takes on the final description as one of the most savage civil wars in recent history, it requires a little more journalism than an armed insurgency and the conflict slid. It morphed and it slid, right? How did it morph? And who provided the momentum for it to continue to slide for 5 years, right? That's the thing that nobody will ever ask in our journalism, because, of course, asking might lead you to answers. We did that on purpose. We killed these who knows now, 300,000, 400,000. Who's counting? They don't count. They're just Syrians. They're just Arabs. They're poor, most of them. So who right? We didn't count millions of Darfurians. We don't even hardly know that it happened, let alone think of them as individual human beings. So who cares? Morphed into an armed insurgency. Who supplied these arms, right? And how'd that get past the United Nations to allow this? As the U.S., Iran, Hezbollah, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and ultimately Russia poured in weapons and cash to back up opposing sides of the war. Oh, now we're going to get it. That's how it morphed and slid. As the U.S., Iran, Hezbollah, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and ultimately Russia poured in weapons and cash to back up opposing sides of the war, the fighting became more brutal. Massacres were committed on a massive scale, and entire blocks in major cities were reduced to rubble. Because that's what all these countries that are part of the United Nations see fit to do when they want to take out a stubborn regime. Through it all, Assad has been unflinching, maintaining that he is fighting terrorism. The rise of that's just why I say his strings are pulled too, because if they really wanted him gone, he'd been gone as fast as Iraq or Libya or anybody else. He provides the pivot point here. He provides the point of contention for Russia, Iran, everybody pivots on that piece of land. France. I mean, that's why this has to escalate. Through it all, Assad's been unflinching, maintaining that he is fighting terrorism. The rise of the Islamic State group and al-Qaeda's branch in Syria, the Nusra Front, has eclipsed the original core of nationalist activists seeking an end to dictatorship so completely that Assad claims that it's a myth that the uprising began with the arrest of students in Daraa and subsequent protests. He says, Assad says it's a myth, all right, because that's not where it began. The whole story didn't exist. It didn't happen. It was only propaganda. Assad said in a recent interview with German television ARD. For ordinary Syrians who took part in the initial protests, there is still a sense of bewilderment at how quickly it all went down and a feeling of immense, irreversible loss. I never imagined that the regime will last until 2016. Syria will never be the same. I don't think it will be one Syria. See, this is what I'm trying to get to, why I'm sticking with this article, Dad, is it looks like that's what they're telling us, that they want to divide up Syria. Former U.S. Ambassador to Syria Robert Ford says he, like many other seasoned diplomats, underestimated the ability of the Syrian government to survive so long, not imagining that Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia would intervene so heavily on Assad's behalf. So incompetence from our people in charge is resulting, you mean, in all this death? We've been supporting this side that's kept this most savage civil war going and the refugee crisis to Europe, the untold billions this is costing in life, property, and pursuit of happiness. They're just you're right, immeasurable loss based on what? Incompetence? Meanwhile, the United States was hesitant from day one to provide serious help to the opposition. Its top priority has been the fight against IS, and it is anxious to get everyone on board. Yeah, how's that going, by the way, our fight against IS? That and Russia's game-changing military intervention in Syria led world powers to agree in November on a roadmap for a political transition that involves UN-supervised parliamentary and presidential elections within 18 months. See, I see this as, the need. They brought in, U.S. didn't do anything. They've made this thing, this worst civil war in the world that they can make it. Bring in Russia, this stalemate that they knew would come. Now we've got to have UN so we don't have nuclear war with Russia, and now we're going to have to divide Syria so we don't have nuclear war with Russia, and that's what can eventually be a border that brings nuclear war. But for now, it looks like it's going to end in a divided Syria. Building on the momentum, the U.S. and Russia last month engineered a partial ceasefire that excludes IS and the Nusra Front. The ceasefire took effect on February 27th. Although limited, tentative, and marred by sporadic violence, it mostly has held, which means, I guess, the U.S. and Russia aren't killing each other. Everybody else is still killing each other. Peace talks are to resume on Monday in Geneva after previous round collapsed because of a government offensive in Aleppo. But negotiations could collapse over the seemingly insurmountable issue of Assad's fate. Though the opposition dropped its demand that he step down before negotiations, it says it will not accept any process that doesn't end with his removal. Assad has shown no sign that he is willing to go, and it's not clear his international backers, including Russia, are willing to force him out. See? Ford, a fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, is pessimistic about a political deal and says the cessation of hostilities may be only temporary. He is increasingly worried that Syria will be partitioned unless a way is found to establish a credible and inclusive new government to preserve the country's unity. It may be a de facto partition, sort of like Cyprus, between Greek and Turkish communities, and even a de facto partition likely will involve more hard fighting. Lund doubts Syria can be glued together in the short term. Right now, we seem to be headed towards a situation where the opposition is broken and Assad is left as the only game in town, but is still too weak, too illegitimate, and too exhausted to patch things up and return Syria to being a functioning country. So see where they're leaving us, Dad? Syria's screwed. They'll never be whole in the short term, right? Nothing can make them whole again, is what we're being told. What a shame. What a crisis. And I say now, this is what I wanted to, why is this so important to me this week, is because where is this divide really? See, notice they don't bring up Sunni Shia there, do they? Nothing about Sunni Shia. Except that's what's really going on. That's what this war is really about. And the fact they don't bring it up is more read between the lines. Where's the journalism? Why are these people fighting so hard amongst each other? What is this partition about? So now this article, Taliban says rejects futile Afghanistan peace talks. This finally helped me get a little bit to the bottom of what's going on over there in Afghanistan, why 15 years of fighting. And of course, it's because it's a basic Sunni Shia divide in a country that has enough of each of them that they have to just keep killing each other back and forth. The Taliban's not about to concede their country to become a client state of the West. The Taliban, ousted from power in a U.S.-led military intervention in 2001, has been waging a violent insurgency to try to topple Afghanistan's Western-backed government and reestablish a fundamentalist Islamic regime. Now, considering the fact that all this Al-Qaeda and terrorism is all CIA funded, it's all BS. It doesn't come from these people. It doesn't come from true Islamic people. Then it shows me that, imagine if we were taken over by somebody and we had some government in there that was running our country. Wouldn't we be fighting a violent insurgency? Wouldn't we call those people heroes? Right? Why is that never pointed out? We invaded their country, a U.S.-led military intervention, which has been proven to be over, you could say it's about heroin, but that's just minor. That's just the fact that we had to keep controlling the heroin. That would have gone on anyway, even if it would have gone on in secret. But the military intervention to topple the Taliban, the government of their people, because come on, how much weapons does the Taliban have to keep the whole country in submission? And show me the evidence that that's what they were doing. Why don't I ever see evidence? You show me these liars like Colin Powell or Hillary Clinton. These professional liars are the ones that you're getting your evidence about what they have, what they've done, what they're trying to do. That's where you get your evidence. Professional liars. Washington Post, professionally wrong is what they are. They showed that in one of these movies I was watching. It was the Washington Post or one of them that was reporting that the Catholic Church, right? They were reporting that mainstream line. Turned out to be wrong, wrong, wrong. You that love your Washington Post and your New York Times, they're wrong about everything because they're just punking for the man, giving us the BS propaganda of the time that's supposed to be liberal, the liberal BS. So anyway, yeah, Afghanistan's just being taken over. We can't have any of this. But the Taliban, which calls itself the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, denied it would be participating in any upcoming talks in Islamabad. They're like, we're not talking to these people. We reject all such rumors and unequivocally state that the leader of the Islamic Emirate has not authorized anyone to participate in this meeting. Islamic Emirate once again reiterates that unless the occupation of Afghanistan is ended, blacklists eliminated, and innocent prisoners freed, such futile, misleading negotiations will not bear any results. See, we're trying to pretend that we're over there trying to have talks, and they're saying, yeah, but we're not you're trying to just pretend you can compromise us by talking with you as if you have a legitimacy to give us less than our government back. So, I don't know the Taliban. I just know injustice when I see it. And if the Taliban is unjust, they should be brought to justice through justice, not through injustice. So anyway, it just shows you, I'm trying to lay that on the foundation of what I started with Bernie Sanders pointing out what we've done all over South and Central America. Now this one, Dad, Iraq Prime Minister vows retaliation after IS chemical attack. See, because Iraq, funny enough, has been turned back into a Shia-governed body to further split this division. Because IS, of course, is pronouncing to be some sort of Sunni caliphate. Which, of course, as I've pointed out, they got nothing to do with Islam or any caliphate, but that's what they're claiming. And they're Sunnis, and so now, of course, they can't have Iraq officially on their side. So remember, Iraq is that other country that Cheney had predicted would be divided, partitioned. And I see the seeds of that to try and move on a little bit today, Dad. I know I've taken some time, but I think this is what you really see going on in there. As I say, I think we're getting ready for the uprooting of Assad and the redividing up of that land. And I'm not sure. I still say that this Sunni-Shia civil war has not reached its zenith. Does that come after this? Is that the going forth conquering and to conquer of the little horn on the white horse? Is that the fight on that Sunni Shia front? Is what I'm starting to ask myself. Is it before that to go conquer these other Sunni kingdoms, like, to turn Egypt and to Libya and Somalia, all these different countries, to go out and get them under the sway of this new caliphate, Arabia, at some point, and then to come after Jerusalem with that power? When does the Sunni-Shia civil war take place, or is it still what has to take place? Is that what this final uprooting will really, are we only at the beginning of that, where that's what's going to come out of this final uprooting? Is a full-on Sunni-Shia civil war, and out of that will rise this caliph, this white horse king that's given a crown to rule all the Sunnis that survive this. I think this is our future that's coming. Sunni-Shia civil war, rise of a new caliph, fall of the Syrian kingdom, perhaps partitioning of the land, and then the fall of Saudi Arabia before the Great War, because as the Quranic eschatology puts it, it'll be at the time when Medina is in ruins that the Great War comes. So anyway, when you look at what's going on in there, it's just like what we did in South and Central America. It's this regime, we're in there regime changing. That's why the Taliban can't stand us. Look what's gone on in Iraq. That's the whole world. There's not there's so many documentaries now about, even in our own country, even in our own system, the liberal left points out that ISIS and extremism is all a result of our bad policies in the Middle East. And I say, yeah, bad for who, right? Who are the people pulling those strings? Who's behind those policies? You mean people like AIPAC, the Israeli lobby? So has it been bad for them, these policies? Is this not in are they not in favor of how it's going? They're over there tearing down settlements, fueling the fire between their neighbors. So, I say you got to read between the lines and see that they want that. This isn't about making peace and stopping ISIS. It's about fueling these fires with ISIS, with this 15-year war with the Taliban, with this funding these rebels against Assad into this losing, torturous civil war that they knew would result in hundreds of thousands of deaths and millions of refugees that would then put pressure on the whole European Union to get them to fund Turkey and Turkey's bid to do their part. Just like, go back to what England did. What do superpowers do? England went and used Russia to come down on the Ottomans from the north. They went and used the Hashemites, right? They put their pressure on. So I say, look at the world that way. Arab League brands Lebanon's Hezbollah terror group, right? More division here toward the Sunni-Shia civil war. The Arab League, and who are they? All American client states. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, declaring Hezbollah. Who's Hezbollah? This party of God, they're the arm of Iran over in that part of the world, and it's not that they're the arm of Iran as much, that it's rarely mentioned in this journalism. They're the Shia. They're the arm of the Shia believers. It's like the Protestants and the Catholics, That's how this is their church, this is their people, this is their way, and their government, and their society being represented. And the hostility, again, trace it back. When's that all come about? Has it been around 1,000 years? No. It's only been around since all this stuff going on in the 50s and 60s and 70s over there. That's how long. Before that, you got this division of the Kingdom of Saud fighting against the Hashemites, and that, rift in their world that's been funded by England and America. The establishment of Transjordan, giving him the control over the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, and giving Saudi Arabia the control over Mecca and Medina, keeping that rift alive all these years. But since the 50s, 60s, 70s with, the Shah of Iran and all the messing around with the kingdoms over there, Egypt and Israel, the wars that we funded with Israel to expand their territory over there, and sort of plant the seeds of all of this future. So that parties like Hezbollah and all these type of Palestinian Liberation Organization, where do they get the roots for that? But in the terrorism that was coming from the West on those people. So, look at your history. These people, I think should need to be understood. I don't condone anybody's terrorism on any side. I don't care how desperate you are. God on my side, Allah on that side doesn't condone it either. Nothing in their scriptures that says go blow somebody up because you're persecuted. That's not what the Quran says either. It's all been invented for everybody. Okay, sorry, Adam. Feel like there's just a need to bring in some of the deeper reality. So yeah, Shia-Sunni division in the world. Watch that going on. Now here's another one that just almost makes me laugh if it wasn't so tragic. U.S. South Korea stage assault drill. North Korea threatens to wipe out enemies. Right? Now this is, I don't want to spend too much time because it's the same basic story. Come on, you're telling me North Korea is just, what have they got? What have they got to, um, gives them any confidence in this? Why isn't everybody laughing at them? And this is a Reuters article. U.S. South Korea stage assault drill. North Korea threatens to wipe out enemies. So we're spending money over there, and provocation. This is what upsets me, right? In a world supposedly governed by the UN and us supposedly being the leaders of that, why are we leading through provocation of an enemy that hasn't got any power to carry out what they say they can do? If that's not a wag the dog scenario. And here's, the answer to it's in this other article from the Business Insider on March 11th by Amanda Macias. Says, we spent a day with the world's most advanced missile system that has China and North Korea spooked. Right? And it goes through this. The most advanced missile system on the planet can hunt and blast incoming missiles right out of the sky with 100% success rate, and we got to spend a day with it. Meet America's THAAD system, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, is a unique missile defense system with unmatched precision, capable of countering threats around the world with its mobility and strategic battery unit placement. It is the most technically advanced missile defense system in the world. U.S. Army Colonel Alan Wernicke, commander of the 11th Air Defense Artillery Brigade, told Business Insider in an interview. Combatant commanders and our allies know this, which puts our THAAD batteries in very high global demand. And that demand seems poised to rise. On Wednesday, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un claimed his country had developed miniaturized nuclear warheads which can be mounted to long-range ballistic missiles. The rogue regime's latest announcement is a follow-through. See, rogue regime. I mean, these got to be catchwords for you guys if you're listening to me. Rogue regime, that's catchword for, bad guy, propaganda. This is our bad guy, scapegoat. The rogue regime's latest announcement is a follow-through pass to last month's long-range rocket launch and January's purported hydrogen bomb test. As of yet, there's not been a formal move to deploy the missile system. Anyway, what they're, of course, pointing out is that this system, I'll read it to you. With the complexity of global security challenges is increasingly causing combatant commanders to request more Army forces. U.S. Army Captain Gus Cunningham told Business Insider, with that said, THAAD is ready to respond to any request at any time. If a THAAD battery were deployed to South Korea, depending on its exact location, nearly all incoming missiles from the north could be eliminated, as displayed by the following graphic. So they're already showing us that, not only do we not have to worry about them reaching the United States of America proper, but even South Korea. All we got to do is stick one of these over there. So, but then China's responding, THAAD deployment would break the strategic balance in the region and create a vicious cycle of Cold War-style confrontations and an arms race which could escalate tensions. See, this is what I find so interesting in a world supposedly governed by first a League of Nations that had the wherewithal to look into a future of, less armed conflicts, more diplomatic solutions, and then a United Nations that had quite literally the strength to ensure such a world. And instead, what we have is the idea that if we put a defensive weapon over there that can shoot down missiles, China's claiming that's going to raise the imbalance and make a need to require more weapons. I mean, isn't it a fantastic narrative that we're all caught up in the last 50, 60 years since the United Nations had the power to disarm the world? And now instead, everything's about armament and more armament. And if you put armament in place that can help reduce the need for armament, that's just an excuse for more armament. So everything's an excuse for more armament, and everything is a provocation nowadays. So it's, I don't even know how to answer for the fact that the North Korean threat seems to be all hot air, which, because it's all hot air, it all seems to be quite timely hot air that I think's being thrown out on purpose, just, if anything, to get this sort of equipment moving around, to get all the watchdogs that are watching the justification when those stories come out. America's moving 10 of these over to Indochina. America's moving 15 of them down to Central America, whatever. As we deploy arms around the world to prepare for World War III, what's the justification? Oh, North Korea is threatening the world. So we got to move 100 times the armaments it would take to stop North Korea into position. And China's going, hey, now that's making it unfair for me. So I need to move a bunch of armaments to defend myself. So yeah, I feel so much safer in the world right now. And with a prediction of World War III coming, Okay, so let me try and I got just a couple more articles to add if I can. I'll try and fly through them because I know I'm reaching the end of my time here. European migrant crisis prompts protests. Leaders seek unity. Now, this has been on a couple days in a row out of the AP. Same article, same exact headline. European migrant crisis prompts protests. Leaders seek unity. So that pretty much speaks for itself. It's saying that Merkel's position's being threatened. It's kind of what I think, Dad, that I was saying from the beginning, that the bigger point of all this is the divide and conquer as far as historical narratives. You can't have all of Europe on the same page when this end World War type of scenario comes. You can't have people like that because they can change world course, right? So you have to have people divided over what? Well, now you got this major crisis, and you still haven't even blown off too many false flags to get them really divided. Right now is sort of the main schism. What do we do with all these refugees? Someone like Merkel is saying, hey, we can't sacrifice our way of life because of it, can we? We can't suddenly become like a Soviet bloc nation in the height of the communism because we're faced with a crisis, can we? That's been her position, and which to me is, of course, the strong social democratic liberal modern political position. She's been holding up that flag for Germany as actually the moderate countries, so like Sweden. And then you got the hardliners on the other side, like Viktor Orban over in Hungary, and now Austria is finally getting a harder line, and some of these other Balkan states have decided, hey, they see the reality. You're forcing us. You're forcing our hand. You're pushing us into an economic position that we can't handle. So you have to do something about this. You can't keep pushing it on us. And, what's it doing, which I think is, they know, forcing them all into Greece, the poorest country, which is putting this burden on Europe because these people are doing anything to get out of Greece. The Greek people are helping them do anything to get out of Greece. And so you've got this sudden border problem because Europe's union meant that their internal borders would be soft. You could walk right between Austria and Germany, right between Germany and Italy, or you have these borders that you could transverse without all the security, and that's being threatened right now. If Germany's going to let all these people in, then Austria or Italy or someone on their border is going to say, well, wait a minute now, then I can't just let anybody walk across the border. So that's what they're arguing over. And now this whole other, party, this right wing is rising up to say, like the Donald Trumpers, we can't let this momentary surge, this crisis, rob us of what we're trying to establish in our world, regardless of our need to keep our own freedoms and our own. It's a real crisis as far as they're concerned of ideology right now. How do we maintain it? Or maybe not ideology, but if it's not the crisis of ideology, it's a pragmatic crisis of how to handle it. And of course, thrust into this, they don't all agree. They don't agree with who should pay and how. And anyway, that's what Europe's going through over this right now. And I say that's all on purpose because they're asking Turkey to absorb a lot of this and let us just pay for it, and that they can tax these other European countries. They can have a referendum and vote. Okay, it costs us 10 billion, and Italy you're going to pay 2, and Spain you're going to pay 1.5, and Germany you'll pay 4, and they can all divide it up according to some referendum, and that's it. You get it comes right out of your your central bank drawing rights or however, and it goes right to Turkey for their part. So that might even be the bigger play, just to soak these European countries for money to give to Turkey. I'm not sure, but don't tell me this crisis has many implications right now. It is dividing people. There's talking about Merkel's party who was quite popular, is now being threatened by this. So anyhow, I want to just run through this last couple out of Huffington Post. And this, I think, has to do with that movie, that Spotlight movie, and throwing the Catholic Church under the bus right now. For whatever reason, something's going on in the Catholic Church. I mean, they made a movie making the Catholics, look like, well, kind of what they are, exposing at least this very unfavorable side of them. And they did it, big movie, Oscar, not like the one with Nicolas Cage, Left Behind, where it was like a B movie with a star. This one didn't even have a star as big as Nicolas Cage, but it was Oscar type of movie, and it got an Oscar. So I say that's not on accident. They want people to know about the Catholics. And now in the Huffington Post, HuffPost Religion, an article, or maybe they're putting this Reuters article up here. Anyway, it's titled, 3 years of Pope Francis have unnerved some conservative Catholics. And so just like what's going on in Europe with the refugee crisis, in the Catholic Church, there seems to be this great potential schism going on between the liberals and the conservatives, the ones that want to hang on to this traditional, conservative viewpoint about marriage, homosexuality, sending everybody to hell, get all the sinners to hell, that conservative garbage Catholicism. Apparently, this Pope is threatening some of that with a lot of liberal talk, and it's creating quite a schism right up through his own ranks of his own church. So that combined with what this homosexual, I say that, we're getting to see this big divide and conquer schism in religion. I mean, if it's part of this Albert Pike thing is what I saw, Dad, when I was reading this and watching that movie. I thought, wow, is this how they get, Christianity, Western Christianity, to look so bad that people, as it predicts in that, lose their moral compass. They lose their religious compass. What do we believe in? Is this all part of that coming in the next, say, 10 years? I don't know. So anyway, but schism in the Catholic Church and Pope on the front page of secular reporting, Yahoo. Yeah, nobody I know gives a crud about the Pope or takes Catholicism seriously, and yet here he is on he's every day on an article. So, and then my last one, Dad, GOP candidate Trump calls off rally due to security concerns. So, as I've been trying to tell you since this whole campaign, Donald Trump is not the people's candidate. He might be some people's candidate, the far right wing, Bush fans that are all for a police state that are scared to death of terrorists that think the Muslims are coming to attack us and we need to lock drug users away in prison forever, and all those hardline conservative angles that Trump has been talking about. Sure, the whole take the government back from the lobbyists, that kind of crap, but that's not what's getting him into trouble, according to these to this sort of AP news. These people, they came there to stop this. These people lined up, paid their money, they did what they can to stop this protest, and because they're not for this guy. They can't imagine this maniac and his policies as the official policies representing the United States of America. Sure, some things like no lobbying and those things, everybody's been saying that since I was a kid. Every politician on the liberal, uses that liberal angle to point out. Obama did it with transparency in government and all that. It's meaningless. Here's the issues that they're pointing out. The reasons for protesting Trump. Trump has called for the complete and total shutdown of all Muslims entering the United States. He's claimed that Islam and Muslims are hateful and terrorists and must be barred entrance until he decides otherwise. Trump has generalized the entire Mexican immigrant community as criminals and rapists. He calls for the mass deportation of 11 million adults and children alike, regardless of how long they've lived in the United States. He also calls for the building of a giant wall to separate us from our longtime allies in Mexico. Trump has advocated for war crimes, such as, but not limited to, torture, interrogation, mass murder as a warning, the intentional murder of entire civilian families, and the indiscriminatory bombing of countries in the Middle East. These are just part of the reasons that they list for protesting Donald Trump. So see, nothing about, we don't like his ideas about no lobbying and such. It's that he's representing this extreme right wing, just like what's going on in the Catholic Church, just like what's going on over in Afghanistan with the Taliban, just like what's going on all over the world right now. Divide and conquer, divide and conquer. So, I thought this, was interesting. Enough liberal Americans, and I'm not saying that they're not completely as full of it as the Donald. I'm just saying that enough people wanted to stop Donald in Chicago that they got together and shut the rally down, because that's how not the people's person Donald Trump is. He's that far on one side of the spectrum in order to separate the people, is what I think. So that's what I see, Dad, is this, divide and conquer. Maybe we should call this week, on our way to World War III, is divide and conquer. Anyway, thanks for having me on the show, Dad. Love you. I'll talk to you next week.
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right. And it was another superb analysis of this week's happenings in the news in the Middle East. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube, or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube, and comment. Drop us a line. Subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.